I hadn't even stepped through the front door before I saw it. My suitcase, zipped shut, parked like a silent threat on the porch. No note.
No birthday candle.
Just my parents sitting behind the screen door like statues, Dale with his arms crossed, Marilyn staring into her lap. It was my 50th birthday. I'd just finished a 10-hour shift at the law office, picked up a slice of chocolate cake from that little bakery on 3rd, and drove home expecting, well, not a celebration, but maybe a happy birthday muttered from behind a glass of whiskey. Instead, my father opened the door and said, "You're old enough to take care of yourself. Time to go." No hesitation. No remorse. Just years of sacrifice swept under the rug in one breath. And I stood there, cake box trembling in my hand, wondering, how do you leave a house you paid for without even taking your dignity with you? That was the moment something snapped. Not in anger, not in rage, but in clarity. For years, I had convinced myself that my parents were just tired or old-fashioned or too proud to say thank you. I thought love meant paying their mortgage, driving them to doctor's appointments, crawling up on the roof in the rain when the shingles gave out. I told myself family meant giving without expecting anything in return. But when they told me to leave, they didn't just reject me. They made it crystal clear. I had never been more than a convenient solution to their problems. So I left. Quietly.
No dramaticudnie, no slamming doors.
I just walked back to my car with the cake still in my hands, my name still on their bills, my heart somewhere between numb and boiling. But I didn't just disappear. I unraveled their comfort, strategically, silently, piece by piece. The electricity?
Gone.
The internet Dale used to argue politics all night? Cancelled. The joint savings account my mother used like a grocery stipend? Frozen. They called. I didn't answer. They posted their pity stories online. I posted the truth. Every receipt, every payment, every sacrifice. And now they sit in that same cold house in the dark, while I build a new life in a place where I'm not just tolerated, I'm valued. But some nights, when the wind blows just right, I still wonder what broke first. Their love for me? Or my belief that it ever existed at all? I didn't cry when I left. Not in the car, not when I reached Maggie's driveway, not even when she hugged me and whispered, "It's okay to fall apart now." I just stood there holding that cheap bakery box like it was something sacred, like maybe if I held it tight enough, the pieces of my life wouldn't scatter. We didn't talk much that night. She handed me a blanket, made me a cup of tea, and let me sit in silence while the truth finally settled. I had been used. Not once, not for a moment, but for years. And the worst part? I volunteered for it. I stepped into the fire every time, thinking it was just smoke. The next morning, I woke up in Maggie's guest room with my coat still on and the cake, now smashed, on the nightstand beside me. I didn't need to taste it to know it had gone stale. So had the version of me that had spent a decade trying to earn love through utility bills and canceled vacations. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and did something I hadn't done in years. I made a list. Not a to-do list. A to-undo list. Every account I'd opened in their name. Every bill I'd auto-paid. Every tie that kept me tethered to their house and their rules. If they wanted independence from me so badly, I was going to give it to them line by line, click by click. By noon, the lights in their house were off. The internet was gone. The insurance on Dale's rusted pickup? Cancelled. My name erased from every obligation. I wasn't being cruel. I was being exact. For once, I was choosing myself over their comfort. That afternoon, while Dale probably sat on his recliner cursing the electric company and Marilyn clutched her pearls in the cold kitchen, I was in a coffee shop downtown, opening a new bank account, smiling at the barista, feeling my spine straighten for the first time in years. I wasn't mourning the life I left behind. I was watching it collapse without me. And maybe that sounds heartless, but tell me, when someone builds a life on your back and then tells you to leave, isn't it fair to take your spine with you? They didn't notice right away. That's the part that still stings, how easily I vanished from their world. It took a full day before the first voicemail came in, Marilyn's voice trembling like she'd just woken from a bad dream. "Charlotte, sweetheart, there must be some mistake. We didn't mean for you to actually leave. Just call us, okay? I sat on Maggie's couch, mug of chamomile in one hand, phone glowing cold in the other, and I didn't move. I let the silence stretch between us like a canyon. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't regret. They didn't miss me. They missed what I did for them. They missed having the fridge stocked, the power humming, the insurance card ready when Dale needed another scanned he'd never pay for. But love? Love wouldn't have come with a suitcase on my birthday. By the third day, the tone changed. Dale's message was pure venom. You think you can just walk out and leave us hanging? After everything we did for you? I almost laughed. Everything they did? I wanted to call back and ask which part he meant. The time I skipped my anniversary trip to fix the boiler? Or when I paid the deductible for Marilyn's cataract surgery and she said, "It's the least you can do?" But I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The house was already telling the truth for me. The porch light hadn't come back on. Neighbors were starting to talk. And it wasn't just whispers anymore. Screenshots flooded my inbox. Dale's bitter Facebook rant about his ungrateful daughter. I wasn't the only one who remembered the nights I dragged trash bins down their icy driveway while Dale shouted about the government. Or the mornings I left for work with wet hair and empty pockets because Marilyn had asked me to cover her medication again. One neighbor even commented, "Didn't Charlotte pay their mortgage for years?" Written in receipts and bank transfers and miles of quiet sacrifice. And when I decided to speak, it wouldn't be to explain. It would be to end the story they never thought I'd have the courage to tell. I waited, not out of fear, but calculation. Every day that passed, their story frayed at the edges. Dale's fury spilled louder with each post, but fewer people were buying it. Marilyn clung to her role as the broken-hearted mother, posting vague Bible verses and replying to comments with things like, "We just want peace," as if they hadn't lit the match themselves. I watched it all unfold from the safety of Maggie's kitchen table, my laptop glowing quietly while I assembled my own truth, not loud, not dramatic, but surgical. A folder filled with receipts, emails. I remembered the Christmas I paid the entire winter heating bill instead of buying myself a coat. Or the time I maxed out my card to keep the roof from caving in, while Dale bragged to the neighbor that, "My girl's got a good head for money." Every sacrifice was a stitch in a tapestry they draped over me like obligation. But now I was unraveling it, thread by thread. And when I finished, I did what they never saw coming. I shared it. Not in anger, not in desperation, but in calm, clinical detail. The post wasn't flashy. No dramatic title. Just facts. A timeline. Evidence. My story finally mine. And then, silence. Just for a beat. The kind that fills a room before everything breaks open. Then the flood. Comments, shares, messages. Old teachers, coworkers, even the mailman, people I hadn't spoken to in years reached out. Not with pity, but with respect. One message stood out. "We always knew something was off. You didn't deserve that." For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. And while Dale scrambled to backpedal and Marilyn's posts turned from guilt to passive aggression, I didn't flinch. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because this time, the town wasn't whispering behind closed doors. They were watching, wide-eyed, as the truth laid itself bare. And for once, I wasn't the one left in the dark. They were. I thought the silence meant it was over. That maybe, just maybe, exposing the truth had drained them of their last bit of fight. But then came the knock. Not angry, not rushed, just a polite, calculated tap on the door like someone delivering a package they knew I wouldn't want to open. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, heart steady, and opened it. A man in uniform, mid-40s, tired eyes, stood holding a large manila envelope. "Charlotte Monroe?" I nodded. "You've been served." My hands didn't shake when I took it, but something in my chest folded. I closed the door, sat down at Maggie's table, and opened the envelope. Civil suit, filed by Dale and Marilyn Monroe. Charges: theft, elder abuse, financial abandonment. I almost laughed until I didn't. This wasn't just petty now. It was war dressed up in legal paperwork. Maggie read over my shoulder, her face a mask of disbelief. "They're accusing you of abuse?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The answer lived in every scar I carried that never bruised, every unpaid favor, every birthday forgotten while I made sure they never missed a meal. This wasn't grief or confusion on their part. This was punishment. For leaving. For talking. For surviving without them. But I didn't crumble. I picked up my phone and called the legal aid office in town. Calm, clear, factual. I forwarded the folder I'd built, the same one I'd used to tell the world the truth. The paralegal listened, asked for copies of every bill, every joint account, every text message that proved I'd been their caretaker, not their burden. "You have a strong case," she said. "Honestly, it sounds like you could countersue for exploitation." I paused, letting the weight of those words settle.
Exploitation.
I never said it out loud, but hearing it reflected back felt like someone finally translating the language I'd been screaming in for years. I wasn't chasing revenge. I was chasing peace. But if they wanted to turn this into a legal battle, then so be it. This time, I wasn't the one running. I was standing on solid ground, with the truth behind me and nothing left to lose. The storm they tried to drag me into? I'd already survived it. Now, they'd have to weather the fallout. The court date never came. Not because they dropped the charges out of guilt, but because they realized they couldn't win. When the legal aid team sent them a formal counterclaim for financial abuse, complete with over 60 pages of documentation, it was like watching a bluff unravel. Dale stormed out of the mediation room red-faced and shaking, accusing me of being manipulated by lawyers and twisting the truth. Marilyn just wept, her sobs echoing against the cinderblock walls as if her tears could rewrite history. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The silence between us was now filled with facts, dates, figures, emails. You don't need to shout when the truth already speaks for itself. When we left the building, the sun hit different, warmer, brighter, cleaner. Like I'd finally stepped out from beneath a cloud I didn't know had been following me for years. Maggie hugged me outside the courthouse. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything. Not a ride, not a favor, not an explanation. Just myself. But freedom isn't always loud. Sometimes it's as quiet as deleting a contact. That night, I sat on Maggie's couch, phone in hand, and scrolled through the names that had weighed me down for years. Dale, Marilyn, Aunt Ruth, Cousin Glenn. People who had opinions about me when I stopped performing, but never once asked how I was surviving. One by one, I blocked every number tied to that house, that history. I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I just let go. And when the last number was gone, I placed the phone face down and exhaled, like my lungs finally remembered what air without guilt felt like. The next morning was still, almost unsettling. No angry voicemails. No dramatic texts. Just birds outside the window and coffee brewing in Maggie's kitchen. I took it all in slowly, warm mug in my hands, soft sunlight on the floor, the sound of nothing pressing against me. I hadn't realized how much space chaos took up until it was gone. And in that stillness, something bloomed. Not joy, not triumph, but peace. The kind that comes when you know the worst has already happened, and you're still here, standing. I didn't win a war. I just walked away from one I was never meant to keep fighting. And maybe that's what real victory looks like. For a while, I believed that silence would be the final word between us. That after the courthouse, after the block numbers, and the clean break, the damage would quietly fade into the background like an old scar. But peace, I've learned, doesn't always arrive uncontested. It was a Thursday morning, crisp and ordinary. I was sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug at Maggie's table when my phone buzzed across the wood. At first, I thought it was another job rejection. Instead, it was a message from Carrie, an old coworker who always had one foot in town gossip. "Hey, you seen what your dad posted?" I clicked the link, half expecting bitterness. I wasn't prepared for the avalanche. There it was, splashed across the local Facebook group like a stain. Dale's words, sharpened for public sympathy. Some daughters are raised to be grateful. Others turn into snakes. We gave everything, and she left us to starve. The post already had dozens of comments, some full of pity, others much harsher. Ungrateful brat. One read, "Parents sacrifice and get this in return?" I held the phone to my chest, not out of pain, but to stop myself from shaking with something darker. Rage? Sadness? No, not anymore. Just a kind of exhausted disbelief. Maggie looked up from her laptop. Bad. I could only nod. It wasn't just the lies.
It was how easily people swallowed them.
How fast the tide could turn when one side told a louder story. But then, like a crack in the surface, I started getting screenshots. From people I hadn't heard from in years. Neighbors. Old teachers. Even an ex who once said I was too responsible for my own good. Their messages were short, but steady. We always wondered. I remember you paying their grocery bills when you were barely scraping by. He said you fixed their roof last winter yourself. The tide was shifting again. This time, it wasn't just my voice. Others were stepping forward. Quietly at first, but undeniably. The truth had legs, and it was finally learning to run. Maggie leaned over and whispered, "They're writing your story for you. Are you really going to let them?" I looked at her, the question settling like a stone in my chest. Because I knew the answer.
No.
I wasn't going to let them rewrite the ending. Not this time. I had lived every word, and I was ready to tell it my way.
So I did.
I didn't scream. I didn't throw punches. I told the truth, methodically, mercilessly, and in full color. I opened that folder I'd spent weeks building in silence, and I uploaded it to the world. Every bill, every deposit, every repair, every time I gave while they took. I shared it all in a clean, simple thread. No insults. No rage. Just the receipts. And then I ended it with one line. When they told me to leave, they didn't just lose a daughter. They lost the person who kept the lights on when they weren't looking. The stillness that followed was suffocating. For 10 minutes, nothing. Then the dam burst. My notifications exploded. Likes, shares, shocked comments pouring in like a flood no one saw coming. Former coworkers chimed in. So did neighbors, old friends, even my former guidance counselor. I remember seeing her shovel their driveway at 5 a.m. She used to buy groceries for them every week. They bragged for years they never paid a cent in heating bills. People had noticed more than I realized. They just hadn't spoken until now. Meanwhile, Dale tried to salvage whatever dignity he thought he still had. He posted a brittle status. There are always two sides to every story. Sad to see someone so close twist the truth for attention. But no one was buying it anymore. One person replied, "Interesting how you never mentioned paying for anything until she called you out." Another said bluntly, "You're not sick, you're exposed." Marilyn tried a softer approach, leaving voicemail after voicemail. "Charlotte, honey, your father didn't mean for things to go this far. We can still fix this. Please take it down." But I didn't flinch. Because I finally understood something they never thought I'd grasp. This wasn't about healing. It was about hiding. They weren't ashamed of what they did. They were ashamed people now knew. That afternoon, Maggie and I walked down to the local fall festival. The air smelled like kettle corn and cider, the sky the color of clean denim. I felt eyes on me as I walked, but not the kind that weigh you down. The kind that see you, maybe for the first time. A woman I barely knew, one of Marilyn's old church friends, touched my arm gently. "You deserved better, sweetheart." We all knew. We just didn't say it out loud. And in that moment, I realized the shame I had carried wasn't mine. It never was. That night, after the festival lights dimmed and the smell of roasted corn still clung to my jacket, I stood by Maggie's apartment window watching the town settle into sleep. Somewhere a few blocks away, the house I used to call home sat in darkness, its porch light still dead, curtains drawn, newspapers piling up on the front step like unanswered questions. But I didn't feel sad. Not anymore. I felt free. The kind of freedom that doesn't come from running away but from walking away, on your own terms, with your head high and your truth louder than their lies. The next morning, As sunlight crept across the hardwood floor and coffee brewed in the kitchen, I stumbled across a listing. A tiny apartment downtown, nothing fancy.
Exposed brick, cracky floors, no dishwasher.
But it was mine if I wanted it. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I did. I didn't second guess. I didn't hesitate. By noon, the lease was signed. I didn't even tell Maggie right away. I just stood in that little space, keys in my hand, whispering to the empty room, "You're safe now." The days that followed blurred into soft rhythms, quiet, but healing. I bought a second-hand couch with sun-faded cushions, painted the walls pale blue like the sky outside that courthouse the day I walked away from everything. I found a small desk at a thrift store, dragged it home in the back of Maggie's truck, and placed it under the only window in the living room. Every creak in the floor, every chipped corner of that apartment felt like mine. Not inherited, not borrowed. Mine. One afternoon, while unpacking the last box, I found it, tucked at the bottom like a forgotten bruise. That tiny plastic birthday candle from the cake I never got to eat. The one I bought for myself. I turned it over in my hand, expecting the ache to return. But instead, I felt something else, pride. Not for what had been done to me, but for everything I hadn't let break me. I placed it on the shelf above my desk, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of survival. Some scars don't need to be erased. They need to be honored. Because they don't say, "You were hurt." They say, "You made it anyway." It happened a few weeks later, quietly, almost like a whisper slipped through the cracks of my new life. I came home from the grocery store, arms full of paper bags and wind tugging at my sleeves, and found a card slipped under my door. No envelope. No return address. Just a single piece of cardstock, folded neatly in half. I almost threw it away, assuming it was some neighborhood flyer. But something about it made me pause. Inside, written in careful, deliberate handwriting, were just 12 words. "You were never the problem. Some people just fear who they can't control." There was no name.
No signature.
But I didn't need one. I knew exactly who it wasn't, and I had a pretty good idea of who it could have been. Maybe Maggie. Maybe a neighbor who watched more than they let on. Or maybe just someone who knew the shape of survival well enough to recognize it in someone else. I sat down on my second-hand couch, the sunlight from the window streaking across the pale blue walls, and read the words again. This time, slower, letting them sink in. And for the first time in months, I cried, not from pain, but from permission. Permission to believe what I'd always suspected deep down, that I hadn't failed them. They had failed me. Later that night, as I curled up by the window with a blanket and a book, the city lights blinking like distant stars below, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not happiness, exactly, but wholeness. The kind that comes not from fixing what was broken, but from learning to live beautifully around the cracks. I watched the world carry on. Dogs barking, buses sighing at red lights, strangers laughing as they passed by, and realized something simple but powerful. Life didn't stop just because mine had been shattered. It kept moving, and now so was I. I whispered it to myself like a quiet vow. I am enough. Not because I was perfect, not because I never faltered, but because I chose to keep standing, keep breathing, keep becoming, despite everything they tried to convince me I wasn't. And maybe that's what real family is. Not the ones who claim you by blood, but the ones who make space for you to be exactly who you are, without conditions, without control. Just love and light and peace. Finally, peace.